Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football. Brent Venables, the Oklahoma Sooners, I thought did a very good job in the winter months, really adding to the floor of this Oklahoma team in the transfer portal. And with that second portal window beginning to open up over the next couple of weeks, want to take a deep dive into this Oklahoma roster and talk about some positions that they might want to add to heading into the 2024 season. And I'll start with this. I think this is, and I've been vocal about this over the last couple of weeks, I think this is the most talented and deep this Oklahoma roster has been since Brent Venables has taken over. And I think the emphasis and the focus for Oklahoma and this coaching staff during that second transfer portal is how can we elevate the ceiling of this Oklahoma team? You look top to bottom, the floor is pretty damn high at a lot of these position groups, but there are certain positions that you kind of want to elevate how good these units can be heading into 2024. Going to go position group by position group, talk about where Oklahoma might want to get aggressive in the transfer portal. Really excited to get into this one. Before we do, and as always, just want to say thank you to you guys and a massive shout out to the Oklahoma fans, whether we're talking this program in the transfer portal, on the recruiting trail, taking film deep dives. Y'all know I love talking this program, and the amount of support you guys continue to show to the boys truly does mean a lot. One, if y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel, but much more importantly, would love to hear some of your feedback in the comments section on whether some position groups that you have in mind for Oklahoma to add in the transfer portal. I always learn a ton from you guys. Appreciate y'all always rocking with it. And without further ado, let's get into this one. And I want to start it off with the offensive skill. And I think Oklahoma is in such a good spot in terms of the quarterback, the running back, the wide receiver room. And that is a really good spot to be in heading into 2024. You don't want to be one of those programs that is desperate to add a quarterback or to add wide receivers heading into a 2024 season in that spring transfer portal window. Oklahoma, you kind of take a roster inventory. I mean, Jackson Arnold, you guys see the spring clips. That ball just looks a little different coming out of his hands. No question marks about Jackson Arnold and the future of what he has in this Oklahoma quarterback room. You look at the running back room, really good spot. One of the best running backs in the country in Gavin Sawchuk, but followed by a lot of depth, whether it's guys like Sam Franklin in the transfer portal, whether it's true freshman Taylor Tatum coming into this program. Not only top-end talent in the running back room, but a lot of depth. And then the wide receiver room, I don't know if you could make this Oklahoma wide receiver room better if you tried. I think it not only is extremely deep, but more importantly, you have a lot of different bodies that excel at a lot of different things. You have guys like Nick Anderson who can work vertically down the field. You have a guy like Deion Burks who can separate, but also be extremely dangerous after the catch. Andrew Anthony coming back from injury. It's a very deep wide receiver room. I think it's a very talented wide receiver room. And one of the conversations that I think a lot of college football fans need to hear is it's easy to get wrapped up and add through the transfer portal and then kind of forget about some of the young talent that you want to make sure you're getting reps for in spring and fall camp. Guys like Jaquez Petaway, guys like Brennan Thompson, you want to make sure that you're not overcrowding a position group because you want to make sure those guys are still getting that development that they need. And so I look at this Oklahoma wide receiver room and say, you got a lot of top-end talent. I think Deion Burks is one of the best wide receivers in the country. I think you could say the exact same thing for someone like Andrew Anthony and Nick Anderson, but you also have that young talent that you feel really good about. So you look at the quarterback, running back, wide receiver room, and I don't really think you have many questions at those positions. If there's one spot for Oklahoma fans that is probably the biggest concern on this whole roster heading into 2024, it's on the offensive line. Right, you got a new young quarterback in Jackson Arnold. You got a lot of talent for him to work with. You want to make sure you give Jackson Arnold not only a good run game, but you want to keep him clean in the pocket. And I think a lot of Oklahoma fans think if this offensive line can be good in 2024, you're looking at an extremely dangerous offense. But going into the SEC, I think there's probably some room to work for Oklahoma to continue to build this offensive line. You first look at the offensive tackles and kind of going back to what we said earlier, I think Brent Venables and this Oklahoma staff did a really good job raising the floor of what this Oklahoma offensive line can be, right? Michael Tarkin, Spencer Brown have played a ton of football at the Power 5 level. I think they're solid Power 5 starters. You have a guy like Jacob Sexton, I think probably is the most talented tackle in this offensive line room. But if you're Oklahoma moving to the SEC, if there is that big name that hits the portal at that offensive tackle spot, think a guy like Lance Hurd from LSU, where Oklahoma pursued, that's probably one of those positions that Oklahoma is going to look to really make the ceiling of this offensive line a little bit better. And then you look on the inside, I am extremely confident about what the interior of this offensive line can be. Now, Troy Everett going down with the knee injury. Many of the Oklahoma fans know how high I am on Troy Everett. That maybe makes things a little bit hairy at that center spot. But you talk about what they did in the portal, the young guys that they have in this roster. I am a massive fan of someone like Eugene Brooks as potentially being a starter as a true freshman, or at least a contributor as a true freshman. Depending on the Troy Everett injury and how that is progressing, you might want to get a veteran center because, again, when you have a young quarterback, you want to make sure he's going to get protected. You want to make sure there's a veteran center getting him the football. So depending on the Troy Everett injury, maybe you're looking to add to the inside of that offensive line. But you look at this Oklahoma offense, and I think really the only position group that you're really looking to add into is on that offensive line. We'll kind of continue to talk about this and say, all right, what names are hitting the portal? What names would make this Oklahoma offensive line better? We'll continue to cover that as that portal opens up. And you move to the defensive side of the football, and I think this is where the interesting conversation happens, where this is an extremely talented but also deep Oklahoma defense. But the one position group that I'm looking at and saying, all right, maybe Oklahoma wants to add a body or two is on the inside of that Oklahoma defensive line. And that's for two reasons. One, any chance Brent Venables gets an opportunity to make the line of scrimmage play better, he's going to take it. It's been no secret that Brent Venables, whether it's in the transfer portal, on the recruiting trail, is putting a ton of emphasis on building a dominant defensive line. But more importantly, you want this defensive line to be deep. You look at what Oklahoma's goals are heading into the 2024 season. It's to compete for an SEC championship. It's to make a run in the college football playoffs. And one of the most important things that I look for teams that want to make those extended postseason runs is depth on the defensive line. You look back the last couple of years, Georgia the last couple of years, very deep defensive line. Michigan last year, extremely deep on the defensive line, specifically on the inside. You're rotating a lot of bodies in and out. You want to make sure the depth is there. And I think the conversation you have is, all right, we feel pretty good about guys like DeJoun Terry, but I think the question is, what is Jaden Jackson? What does David Stone look like as true freshmen? If those are guys that you can probably rely on for Oklahoma, you probably feel decent about the depth if Jaden Jackson and David Stone are ready. But if they're still kind of going through some growing pains, those are two guys that we kind of pegged coming in out of high school that probably are day one kind of guys. So you feel good about it. But maybe Oklahoma wants to add a game wrecker on the inside. That's probably a position that I think Oklahoma is looking at. You look at the rest of that defensive line, I think they are loaded not only with top-end talent, but with depth at the edge rusher position. You look at the linebacker spot. Again, you got veterans like Danny Stutzman, who I think is one of, if not the best linebacker in the country. You got some young guys like Lewis Carter, Kip Lewis, Kobe McKenzie that you feel good about. Probably don't need to add any linebackers in this portal, especially with a guy like Deshaun McCullough working with those Willie linebackers during spring practice. And then you move to the back end. And I've been very vocal that I think this is probably one of the better safety groups that you see in the country, right? Headlined by Billy Bowman and Peyton Bowen. If there's one position that I look at for Oklahoma in the secondary and say, all right, there is probably an opportunity to add to the ceiling, to add to the potential of what this Oklahoma team could be, it's probably in that boundary cornerback room where you got some guys like Gentry Williams, who, when healthy, I think can be one of the better cornerbacks in all the country. You add a guy like Des Malone, you have Woody Washington coming back that give you that veteran presence. I think Oklahoma might want to look for an elite cornerback on the boundary that really can open up what you want to do on defense. When you have those guys that are just kind of lockdown cornerbacks that you feel comfortable putting on an island, that is going to open up a lot of creativity for Brent Venables and Zach Alley to get aggressive with their safeties and linebackers, which is exactly what Zach Alley and Brent Venables want to do. And so I'm looking at, and it kind of depends on the names that you see. Is there going to be a stud cornerback that enters the portal? And if there is, that's probably maybe a position that Oklahoma looks to add to kind of bolster that ceiling of what this team could be. But my overall takes are this Oklahoma team is about as talented and it's about as deep as we've seen. And so I feel really good about this. I think they've put themselves in a really good spot. You never want to leave spring practice with glaring holes in your roster, because it gets a little bit harder to fill those holes in the spring portal window versus the winter. I don't see any glaring holes in this Oklahoma roster. I see certain position groups that maybe you can elevate the ceiling for. But outside of that, I think this Oklahoma team's in a really good spot. And again, we'll continue this conversation when names start hitting the portal and we start getting a better feel of what the talent looks like, but not a lot of positions that Oklahoma needs to get desperate in the transfer portal. I think there are some positions that Oklahoma might want to add to kind of elevate that ceiling. Really excited for the next couple of weeks. We'll obviously keep you guys updated in terms of what Oklahoma is doing in the transfer portal. Appreciate y'all rocking with the fellas. Would love to hear from you guys in the comment section, and we'll leave it at that. Talk to y'all later. Peace.